the fact that you can hear the speakers, so you can't actually see me or see the other speakers. You're only going to see what's on our screen. So there's the PowerPoint I'm using, but it could be Word documents or anything that we'd bring up on our laptop and computers you will then see. So there'll be a couple of polls at some point to keep you engaged and interacted as well. And you hopefully notice there's a chat box area down on the right hand side, and you can use that at any point to ask a question. But the main idea is that we're going to have a period at the end that we can use for proper questions and answers. So unless there's a really burning point or issue, I will try and keep an eye out for it, but essentially the last sort of 15-20 minutes we'll be able to cover that. So I hope that kind of clears up the way that the format works. Obviously the fact you're here, you've managed to download the software and join us well and comfortably. So shoot with any questions, and we'll really crack on with the presentation. So I'm going to bring in Mathy now, who's going to deliver her slides for around 20 minutes, and then we'll move it on after that to Alicia as well. So, hey Mathy, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you very well, loud and clear.
Good, good. Well, welcome to this month's webinar. Thank you for joining in and helping me out.
Thank you for having me.
Cool. So we'll do the little thing we practiced the other day where I'll pass over and you can shoot with your slides, yeah?
Okay.
Does it come up okay for you to accept?
I think I clicked accept. Let me know when you can actually see me.
Yeah, will do. Still there at the moment, and we'll try.
I had to switch computers because this one's a lot quicker than mine.
Okay. Yeah, it does say that you're the presenter at the moment. Is there a button that will show your screen? Because I can't actually see your screen.
There we go. Oh no, we're not now.
There we go. Brilliant.
There we
All
go.
right. Well, I'm gonna mute myself, but I'm still here. So if you have any questions from my side, just shout and I'll unmute myself. All right.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Great. So hi everyone. I'm just going to introduce myself. My name is Mathy, and I've just graduated from the University of Sheffield, where I studied Hispanic Studies and Politics. I also campaign with Trailblazers, which is a network of young disabled people who work together on a national and local level to highlight and address social injustices and other issues that disabled people face. I'm just going to actually correct Martin here. I'm not a wheelchair user, but which does affect my day-to-day life. Means that I walk slowly, can't really climb stairs and things like that. So during my final year of university, I decided to undertake this dissertation, which involved working with Trailblazers to look into the issues and problems that disabled people face with finding accessible housing. The investigation was started by myself with Trailblazers when we heard a lot of concerns raised by our members who were searching for accessible accommodation to rent and buy. They reported having to wait years to find wheelchair accessible homes, despite local authorities providing funds for adaptations to thousands of homes annually. I personally was interested in starting this investigation because of my own negative experiences of looking for accommodation in my first year at university, offices with some accessibility requirements. From my occupational therapist, I was given a flat on the top floor of a building without a lift, and it made me wonder whether other disabled people were facing similar problems with housing. And in the end, I moved back home, and I've been really reluctant to look for housing since then, so it's really restricted my independence. During my investigation, I did find some interesting statistics. So from the Lifetime Homes Project, they said that over 40% of disabled young people between the ages of 16 and 24 are living in accommodation that doesn't meet their needs. After college or university, many people want to move away from home and begin a new chapter of their life, and this isn't any different for young disabled people. Despite the huge shortage of wheelchair accommodation in the UK, evidence seems to suggest that poor allocation of housing really excludes disabled home seekers. Another report I found, which was published by Habinteg, showed that between 2008 and 2009, less than a quarter of local authority and housing association properties that had wheelchair standards were actually allocated to wheelchair users, meaning that a lot of adapted homes could have been inhabited by those without a need for them. So these statistics, again, were a big motivation for Trailblazers to start this investigation. So back to my presentation. Just gone forward a bit. In the slides that I'm going to show you, I want to share with you all the work and research that I've done. I'm going to outline the various difficulties that I found that disabled people who were Trailblazers face when looking for housing, and share some advice and ideas for practical solutions that I think should be implemented by the housing industry in order to help disabled people who seek independent living. So as my research looked at housing and independent living, I want to talk about the concept of independent living just really briefly. So the Office for Disability Issues defines independent living as being about disabled people having the same level of choice, control and freedom in their daily lives as any other person. They promote a policy of encouraging independent living for disabled people through the independent living strategy, and focus on housing to empower disabled people through the provision of advice and information, and to maximize their housing opportunities by influencing provision of and access to suitable housing. Obtaining barrier-free accessible housing is a key component of being able to live independently, but as most disabled people know from experience, even the littlest problem can prevent some people from finding housing and achieving that aim of independent living. So as you can see here, there's a number of themes that emerge from our investigation. I'm going to go through each one of these themes now in a bit more detail and pick up on some practical solutions that were highlighted in this investigation. So the first one, lack of awareness among service providers of disability. I heard a lot of feedback from people responding to our survey concerning a lack of awareness among service providers like estate agents, local authorities, housing officers, landlords, and student accommodation officers of disability. Many people have come across a failure to fully understand or take into account disabled people's needs in standard practice. For example, I received a comment about an experience of being allocated accessible accommodation, which you can read on your slide. It said, people assume that they know what your disabilities are. They assume everyone's the same. They assume that if they can manage, then you can. They assume if it's a flat, it's suitable for any disabled person. There may not be access by a vehicle up to the entrance. It might not be possible to put a ramp outside the entrance. It could be that there are some stairs inside the entrance. A lift might not be big enough for a wheelchair. A door to a flat might not be suitable to be widened. These are just some of the issues they ignore because they assume and they will not listen. So in a focus group discussion that we had at a regional meeting for Trailblazers, someone suggested to me that housing providers might be unaware of disability due to the fact that disabled people actually form a really small proportion of their clientele, which may not be an acceptable excuse, but still. So they haven't really had the need to have any knowledge of disability. Another reply to our survey said that housing providers tend to have able-bodied people in mind, so they don't think that disabled people have the same sort of need for accessible accommodation. While one person highlighted the need for a more readily available database of accessible housing, someone else told me that the current accessible housing register and other accessible property-specific websites only provide a really limited number of listings, so in effect they're pretty useless. I received a lot of responses mentioning local authorities not understanding an individual's disability and support needs. For one person, since their local authority failed to take into account the fact that they had a progressive disability, they had to wait 8 years after the allocation of a special grant for all their required adaptations to be fitted, during which time their needs had actually changed. And someone else who was facing a similar problem with adaptations blamed decision makers for making judgments based on finances rather than needs. So the next problem we're going to look at is a lack of understanding among service providers of access requirements and what constitutes an accessible home. I consistently read reports in the questionnaire responses of disabled people encountering this lack of knowledge of accessibility in housing. It seems that the biggest problem for disabled people is that housing providers seem to generalize the requirements of all disabled people without considering various needs of individual impairments. For example, often providers can't distinguish between the needs of ambulant disabled people, like myself, who can walk, and the needs of wheelchair users. So they often confuse mobility housing, which would be suitable for me, someone who can walk, with wheelchair housing. And obviously this means that what's suitable for someone may not be suitable for someone else. The vast majority of questionnaire respondents told me that they wouldn't feel confident with the accuracy of advice provided by housing service providers. And one problem is that they don't really understand the meaning of level access or how to make a property accessible. This seems to be because they generally do fail to consult with disabled people or ignore information being openly offered to them to ensure that suitable options are provided, and they really make inaccurate assumptions of a disability and requirements. Information for accessibility for wheelchair users is really largely absent from property websites if you have a look, and experience shows that even in person many estate agents have little accurate knowledge of accessibility of their own properties. One respondent really summarised their opinion well. I'm just going to quote them here. Every disabled person has different needs. All the people in these housing jobs assume we all have the same needs. Everything is standardised and nothing is made to measure. I never met a disabled person to be in any of these types of jobs, so how can anyone possibly know what disabled people's needs are? Almost all of the replies that I've heard felt that the whole housing industry, from development and building stages through to distribution, was unaware of or even unconcerned with the needs of disabled people. Many believe that property developers don't really consult enough with disabled people when planning and building, and will often do the bare minimum required to meet legislation, like building a certain number of properties with level access, but without really considering the suitability of the rest of the property for a wheelchair user. A lot of people noted that standards of new build housing have certainly improved, but one person added, I think although there is an understanding of basic access requirements, i.e. level access, and turning space, there are more complex issues that developers simply don't think about. Involvement of disabled people is critical to ensure that accessibility of housing is improved. Someone else said that they reported having found major flaws in the basic design of new build housing, such as narrow passageways, false walls and ceilings, and unnecessary steps and split levels, which would actually make an adaptation for a wheelchair user really difficult, if not virtually impossible. So to counter these problems of lack of awareness and limited conceptions of disability held by the housing sector, a popular idea seemed to be providing disability awareness training, which would be a lot more comprehensive than the current guidance in place for the building industry, which, as the name suggests, is simply guidance rather than something enforced. So the next problem was lack of availability of accessible housing in the current housing stock. For those who've moved into their own housing, more than a quarter of people I heard from indicated problems with local authorities not really being able to provide accessible housing to those with a need for it. In an interview, one person with a disabled child said, the council doesn't really provide enough adapted property to rent. Many accessible properties are unavailable as they're occupied, sometimes by people who don't have a need for them. Another person said, when I was living with parents and searching for accessible housing through the local authority, I was told that everything accessible in the area was occupied and there would be nothing available until someone died. Many respondents who were wheelchair users stated that they have had or would foresee having problems with finding existing suitably adapted accommodation. I'm just going to let the quotes here from replies speak for themselves. One person told me, I don't think it would be easy to find a property which is suitable to my needs straight off the bat. It's more a matter of finding one which I can adapt myself. The difficulty is getting a property adapted before you move in. Either you have to pay for 2 properties at once to get it done beforehand, or you have to move to an inaccessible property and attempt to make adaptations as quickly as possible. So regarding challenges or obstacles to finding accessible accommodation, one person mentioned a real lack of housing, both social and private, that meets the needs of disabled people, while another response simply stated, there is none available. So what we found suggests that current building regulations don't really go far enough to create suitable, livable, as opposed to visitable housing for disabled people. In particular, it seems that new build housing is built to a minimum accessibility standard, which fails to fully consider the needs of disabled people. In my research, I found a study which stated that the combination of extra expenses, financial risks, and extended time periods required to develop housing which is accessible for various groups of disabled people has compelled many housing developers to choose traditional designs over new and more accessible ones, which unfortunately comes at the expense of disabled people. We've had feedback suggesting that a practical solution to this would be requiring that disabled people themselves have a greater consultation role in decisions made about housing standards, planning and design. As well as this, almost all the questionnaire respondents were concerned with the failure of local authorities to match needs to availability of housing more effectively. Currently, it's almost impossible to search for properties suitable for wheelchair users, so a database of accessible housing, similar to the current accessible housing register that I mentioned earlier, but with more comprehensive listings, should be made more available. So the next point I'm going to look at is differences in the standards and provision of care across local authorities. Almost all the respondents that I've heard from voiced concerns about access to care and potential problems with support should they need to move from one local authority to another, which is a big problem if you're looking for independent living. The general consensus seems to be that there is a postcode lottery of services. As local authorities often have different rules and criteria surrounding social services, care and support, many doubt whether the same level of care and support will be provided to them outside of their current local authority. The existence of differences between local authorities is extremely troublesome for disabled people who require a significant level of support and care to be able to live independently. Some respondents even commented that this lack of consistency has posed severe restrictions for them in their freedom of daily life, which is a key tenet of independent living, and has actually minimized potential opportunities for their freedom of movement. So the last point I'm going to look at is financial services and the use of those. So for people who have used direct payments and disabled facilities grants, I've generally heard quite positive things to say, with a lot of people who have been in receipt of them in the past or currently, saying that these funds have actually allowed them to live more independently. But I did find several obstacles to the successful implementation of these financial services. Firstly, awareness. Nearly 3/4 of respondents that I heard from said that they hadn't heard of disabled facilities grants or were unsure of their purpose. Several respondents were put off applying by the lack of clear guidance and the amount of time and bureaucracy that's actually involved in the entire process, and they chose to self-fund their adaptations instead, which can actually cost them quite a lot of money because they're paying offhand. For those who've received the DFGs, many complained about the time taken for their applications to be processed before any adaptations could be carried out. One person mentioned that these problems with housing associations and builders meant that they had to complete their paperwork 3 times since the timing of the funding had elapsed. While more respondents said that they knew of direct payments or had used them, similar obstacles had also arose. In particular, several people I'd heard from had mentioned a breakdown in communication between housing providers and social service providers that carried out needs assessments. So overall, as you can see, our investigation highlighted a number of issues and found several very viable solutions. Housing service providers could take into account the needs of a disabled person in standard practice so that housing opportunities can actually be maximised. Potential changes are actually really simple, from increasing understanding of access requirements and what constitutes as an accessible home, to involving disabled people more actively in the housing design process and policy making, to more comprehensive disability awareness training across the entire housing sector. Collectively, these changes would help to dismantle barriers and actually facilitate a change of culture in the industry to promote accessibility as standard practice. Local authorities should also address care and support services for disabled people by streamlining provisions across departments and other service providers and coordinating services between local authorities. This would help to facilitate independence, regardless of location. A streamlined and coordinated approach could also be implemented to simplify the process of applying for financial provisions like direct payments and disabled facilities grants, and that's what actually helped to encourage their uptake. Better guidance that can be provided to disabled people and better coordination among service providers are crucial in achieving independent living. My research of housing legislation and policy, which I'm really not going to bore you with because it's actually quite a lot, helped me to see that introducing additional legislation, regulations, and non-statutory guidelines in order to force housing providers to produce accessible accommodation and make it more available wouldn't really solve these problems. In fact, any further bureaucracy put in place for the housing sector would really be counterproductive. I believe that the key to making this required change lies not in creating more statutory regulations for the housing industry, but in changing the attitudes and practice of the industry as a whole. The industry really needs to take a more inclusive approach to deal with the needs of society rather than stigmatizing disabled people. Using an all-encompassing standard practice that would be considered as a housing standard, regulating the process of getting housing, and streamlining support services provided by local authorities will go a long way in attempting to meet the needs of disabled people. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for listening, and I should hand it back to Martin now, if I can figure it out.
Thank you very much, Mathy. Sincere apologies for saying you're a wheelchair user. It was a massive assumption on my side there. I mean, you've done a grand job of both sort of pulling together all the holistic information and obviously tailoring it for today's presentation too, because I know you said there was a lot of sort of policy side in the dissertation, wasn't there?
Yeah, it was really kind of, because it was for a politics dissertation, it was very policy-based, so I did try and make it a bit more understandable for someone who doesn't know a lot about politics.
Sure, no, and you've absolutely hit the nail on the head. That was really perfect for what I think the audience here needs. So thank you very much for that. I mean, on a sort of personal level, have you had any particular sort of horror stories or things that went on in your own periods of house hunting to sort of pass mention to?
I think the biggest horror story that I had was obviously my first year of university, and I knew that I wanted to move out of my house. So well before anyone else started thinking about housing, I contacted the housing officers at my university, and I said to them, I really want to move out. Can you show me somewhere that's accessible that I could live in? And they're showing me this really nice. It was a ground floor flat, and it's really big, and it was built for a wheelchair user, but they said that they'd be able to give it to me, and it would be really accessible, and it had a really big shower and everything. And as I got closer to the date when I was moving in, I realized that the room that they put me in was in the only building in the entire area that didn't have a lift, and it was on the top floor, and it was just a really horrible thing, because I've heard afterwards that there's a lot of people who are being given wheelchair accessible rooms, I guess maybe just because of random allocation, but they're not really thinking about the fact that there are people that have the need for it. And it made me think that this can happen at university. What if this is happening in real life outside of that kind of student realm? And it just made me feel really bad about it.
Absolutely, and also many people take that first step out of the family home during the university stage. So obviously it needs to be perfect in every walk of life, but it's maybe a good place to sort of start, isn't it, within the universities to try and crack it.
Yeah, I mean, I was hoping to use that as kind of a stepping stone, but it has meant that the last 4 years of university I've been living at home, and I live about an hour away, so it is a lot more difficult to do things.
Yeah, I mean, and I know when I moved on, sort of my university life was in a halls that was adapted, but my horror stories happened when I went to London, and it took about 4 months to find somewhere when I'd already was meant to be starting a new job. And it began with the normal looking for a room in a house as everyone else would do, and realised that wasn't going to be practical anyway, and then started looking for normal flats with sort of everyday estate agents, and it was quite shocking how people on Gumtree and the estate agents had no concept of what wheelchair accessible was.
Exactly, and I find it really surprising that the number of times I've gone to an estate agent and said, what do you know about this property? And they really don't know anything about it, even though it's part of their properties, and they don't know that there's a step to the front door. They don't know these things, and it just shocks me that they should really know more about it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, hopefully once your dissertation findings are put out there more and more, like for example through something like today, we can try and put some pressure on that industry to change things a bit more.
I hope so.
Cool. All right. Well, I'm gonna, if you could pass it back over on the presenter mode, I'll sort of move the seminar on, and then are you all right to stick around for the question and answer at the end? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm still here.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Mathy.
No problem. Have I made you presenter now?
Not. Yeah, there we go.
Okay.
My computer's on a go slow today, I think. Cool. Okay, that should be able to, can you see my screen now?
Yes, I can.
Brilliant. All right. Thank you very much, Mathy.
No problem.
Okie dokie. So we'll move on. I think we'll do a little poll now to make sure everyone's still awake out there. Just going around on my little sidebar on the tools here. So Alicia Wood's going to be joining us in a moment to talk about the work she does for housing options, but we'll do a little interactive tool here. I posed the question, what is the hardest part of house hunting with a disability? Now obviously Mathy's outlined a fair few of all these, but I want you to give your personal view on this, or indeed it could be from professional experience, but if you can choose one of these, then literally click on the answer that you think is the most relevant. Hopefully you should be able to see all of that now. There we go. So yeah, if you can all answer, the the ones you think it's going to be. I'll give you a few more seconds to click on it. We've got physical access, knowledge or attitude of a state agent, lack of information, finance, and other. So if all of you click on the answer that you believe is the hardest part of house hunting with a disability, then I'll share the results of the poll with you. Okay, I think all of the answers are in now. Yep, there we go. And then share. Okay, you should all be able to see that, but it's quite unanimously lack of information, which is interesting. I guess that's partly to do with the chronology of it, that if in the very first instance of looking there just is no information on accessibility and certain maybe social policies of transferring different councils as well, then it's just going to put people off even trying in the first place. I'd imagine if and when that part is obviously cracked, then the other ones would start to play a bit more of a role as well. But that's interesting that unanimously 100% it was lack of information seems to be the hardest part. Right, so I'm going to now pass back on over to Alicia. There we go. Okay then. Hello Alicia, can you hear me?
Hi Martin.
Hello there. I feel like I'm doing some kind of Eurovision link up here. It's quite amusing.
I'm not in Spain though, I'm afraid.
I know. I've made a couple of blunders on the intros here, but anyway, we're still moving and we're still laughing, so it's all good. Are you okay where you're set up at the conference today?
I am. I may have a little bit of noise, people going past, because they're going back into a session at 1:45, so I'll apologise for that. But I think I've got some decent headphones and mic, so
Okay.
We should be able to do it okay.
Well, definitely we can get your presentation done, and then obviously, hopefully you can stay around for the Q&A as well. But as you say, if there's a bit of background noise, I'm sure we'll be able to get through with that. So I'm just going to pass it over the presenter mode, okay? That should be popping up on your screen now. Does that come through okay? Right, it's I think your screen is now showing. Yeah, there's a little bit of I don't know if the connection's coming and going. I can see it. Basically, your screen is there.
Okay, shall I start?
Yeah, I can hear you clearly again. There we
Okay.
are. We're back on now. We're back on. Cool. Off you go, Alicia. Thank you.
Okay. Hi. Okay, my name's Alicia Wood. Obviously, I work for an organisation called Housing Options. We set up, I'm just trying to move my slide on here. I'm not doing very well with that. An organisation called Housing Options. We're a national housing advice service. We set up quite a few years now. I can't do my mental arithmetic, but 1996. And I think that listening to Mathy and lots of the issues that people, particularly with physical disabilities, are experiencing, I think there are definitely some similarities in terms of the experience around, getting housing access and attitudes of people. But I think there are some really different issues for people with learning disabilities. So as 1996 wasn't that long ago, but there were a great deal of people with learning disabilities who were still living in institutions, and whether that was sort of long-stay hospitals or NHS services or residential care and sort of big group homes provided by private providers. That was really standard in 1996, and we'd started doing some research alongside some other providers, particularly housing providers, to look at, well, what are some of the alternatives to this? Can people with learning disabilities live in their own homes and get the support they need to do that? And does the benefit system work for them? You know, can they get enough money to pay for that? And you know, does the law support that? And we had to do a whole lot of work around pulling together the possible. So we spent from 1996 probably up until about 4 or 5 years ago, when a lot of this stuff became more mainstream, was really looking at different options for housing. We were the first people to help people with learning disabilities to buy their own homes, which was, you know, a radical thing. I mean, of course it shouldn't be, but it was. People renting their own homes in the private sector, and I think so predominantly the issues that face people with learning disabilities are cultural and attitude, and much less around physical access, though of course that's an issue. There's a minority group of people with learning disabilities that have physical access needs as well, and that's the kind of thing that we do a lot of work on. So what we needed to do was we needed to get as much information out there as possible, and also what we found was, unlike many people with physical disabilities, people with learning disabilities usually have their families who drove this, who drove the process of getting a property. And so we set up an advice service. We have a whole range of fact sheets, and what we do is that we give still today 5 days a week free advice to people with learning disabilities and their families about anything to do with housing option, and whether that's them investing in housing options, shared ownership, private renting, setting up supported living services, whatever. We advise them on that. And funds that we have, and so we're quite advice service for them. So I think the other bit of what we do is we do a lot of national work and just promoting the housing mission. So when the previous government were in power, there were teams in the Department of Health who we worked with a lot to provide guidance, consultancy and support on you know, what the kind of directions that people should be going in. So I think that and the other thing I think that we've become is a real specialist advice organisation that have found financially contribute to housing or use their resources in whatever way to develop ownership options, companies where people want to share as well, and utilised options as well. We've been really successful in getting shared ownership on the agenda and home ownership for people with learning disabilities. What we're facing at the moment, of course, is there's not as much money in the resource out there at the moment. If there is, it's certainly not being prioritised for housing for people with disabilities. So we're looking at some private investment models and how we can pull together, whether that's companies or wealthy individuals, to invest in bonds or directly into housing, so that we can up the sort of quantity of housing available across England. So another part of our work is that there are a lot of housing care providers and registered care providers out there. So we who want to change services, who want to give people genuine choice and control, but often resort to delivering, you know, slightly more acceptable institutional models, and we're sort of really trying to push providers from moving away from that and really looking at more person-centred options. So stopping thinking it's not just about the building, it's not just about care and support, but you know, the kind of things that are really important to all of us are about who we live with or who our neighbours are, the location that we live in, and whether we, you know, want to live close to our families and friends and the people that we love and care about, and the people that we live with. You know, those are the things that really impact on the quality of our lives. And I think, you know, once we get that bit right, I think the other stuff can be difficult, as Mathy described, but I think those are the sort of fundamentals for I think anyone, I think all of us, whether we've got a disability or not. So we have a lot of work around that. We offer a lot of training programs and as well, and conferences, as we have one today, which I'm speaking from. So I think I said earlier we were funded by membership fees, and so we've got lots of organisations that pay different levels of membership. You know, we have individuals and families who'll pay 10 quid a year, and advocacy organisations, carers organisations who might pay £100, and then we've got, you know, big national organisations and local authorities that will pay £2,500, and they basically subscribe to this information service. So I'm quite interested in, won the poll because, you know, everyone, that's 100% more information. And sort of the money that's leaking out of information and advice services, and thinking of other ways of putting money into providing that. So I think there's something really to think about there. We're often contracted by government and, you know, national charities like NEMCAP or SCOPE or whoever to do pieces of work and provide training and write resources for them as well. Anything that we did this year was what people across the country at the moment is you know, the decisions being made about housing, about care and support, about money and funding, which are unfair and in many cases illegal, and really good thing, you know, challenges. We've got a few of our members who you can see on our screen to jointly fund a piece of work where we could just really simply lay out for people facing that what are your rights around housing and social and health care, and your rights to make your own decisions and deal with your money and fair treatment and protection and liberty. So we've done a piece of work, and we hope to build on that and get more case law to go from, so that I think people with disabilities and their families start to feel a bit more confident about, you know, some of the decisions that are being made, and just being able to say, you know, no way, we're not accepting that. So that was one good piece of work. I think predominantly the reason that we need us at the moment, and still I thought we'd been made redundant back in 1996 by 2012. If you'd asked me, I would have thought that, you know, people would be determining their own lives and to get something that they needed. People like Polly and Catherine, who were best friends, who you know, were offered residential care. They really wanted to live together, such a simple thing, but so difficult to achieve, something we most of us just accept and take for granted. So those are the kind of things, helping Polly and Catherine to rent a place together and get the support they need. Or Frances, who spent you know, at age 50, she's spent the majority of her life on a 24-bed ward in an institution, and she finally is able to live with a family. You know, has a really good, lovely, informal and warm relationship with a family that she lives with under a shared life scheme. And then there's Cindy, who was told residential care or nothing. You're basically too disabled for supported living, but her family and us pushed, and she got her own housing association flat, and she has a personal budget, and she employs her own fantastic care team. And Rajinder, who is described as having challenging behaviour, but actually, you know, his behaviour comes about because he's being forced to fit into services for so many years, that he gets a reputation for saying or what he thinks. And Rajinder now has his own place. He's a homeowner, and for someone who had challenging behaviour, he now teaches children karate in his a black belt and has made massive achievements, and you've got to wonder whose behaviour is challenging when you hear those kind of descriptions. And I think it's some of the professionals that stop people from getting the lives that they choose. And finally, Jenny and Suni have families, and it's kind of you know, doesn't make sense when people have money that they can't contribute to their own housing, but much of social housing is set up in that way. So they came together and set up a shareholding company and funded a shared service with lots of advice and support from us and others on that. And I think so we need housing options because we really need people to be able to get that sort of all that technical stuff and get over all those hurdles just to achieve the lives that they really choose. That's me. Thank you very much for listening.
Yeah. Was that all right from your end, yeah?
From my end, do you hear? Okay.
Yeah, halfway through I was a little bit worried we were going to lose you. It went quite distant, but yeah, on the whole it was all good. So thank you very much for that. It was really, really interesting.
Thanks. You're welcome. Can I make you the presenter again, Martin?
You can do, yes please.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, so that's back onto me now. Okay, so you're still unmuted, Alicia. I'm gonna get Mathy back as well, and then we'll see if any people have any questions or something. But just say if you need to head off, Alicia, okay?
Great, yeah, I will.
Cool. And Mathy, you're now unmuted again. Can you hear me all right?
Yes. Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so yeah, if anyone out there has any certainly questions, but it could even just be some other thoughts to add into the melting pot, then now is your time. If you type in the chat box on the right hand side, then I'll be able to read out anything that you want to share really. But while people are typing away, I mean, have you two guys got anything more that you want to add?
I suppose my thinking was around, I know that these webinars are predominantly sort of targeted at people with physical disabilities, and our advice service I don't think is replicated for people with physical disabilities, and we have, I feel pretty sure of that, we get lots of calls from people, and one of our thoughts and directions has been, do we actually extend the advice service and make it available, for example, to disabled people, to people with mental health problems as well. So I'm quite interested, and I think some of the findings of your research, Mathy, were really, I think, helpful in helping us think about how we might be able to do that.
I think one of the things
people think.
Sorry, continue. Sorry.
I just said I'm interested in what people think. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I think one of the things I did find in my research is that there isn't really any clear guidance for people for housing. I think that the government tries to set out these like advice, but it's not always clear, and that is a lot of the problem, is that there's so much advice, so much confusion, and that people don't tend to want to take up like the grants because they think, oh, it's really hard. So I think that there is a need for some sort of advice centre that gives more clear, defined advice than something that the government, especially, I think a lot of people won't know that the government gives advice, and so will be more reluctant to look for it, whereas if it's someone slightly more independent of the government, they might be more keen.
Yeah, I mean, from all the sort of different strands of work I've been involved in, I think it's also very powerful when you, as a disabled person, hear or read about information that we're talking about, but it's come from an individual that has benefited from it as well. So it's not just reading a long website or a generic kind of informational pack, but it's actually how other people have used it and are now over that hurdle and moving on, because it adds that little bit of reality to it as well, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, absolutely. I think in our early days of really getting, whether that was people themselves with learning disabilities, their families, and the government agencies listening, the thing that did it was the real people and the real stories was what made the differences alongside all the technical information.
Yeah,
But we find that's our job, is basically to the sort of all the different strands of information and guidance and law, we kind of pull it together in a way and make it just a bit easier for people to understand, which is really a difficult job in itself.
It really is.
Cool. Well, we've got a question come in here, so it's from Mark, and he said, what would your top tips to finding accessible housing be? After finishing uni, I'm ready to take the plunge and find my own place. So have either of you got any thoughts on that one?
I was just going to say that I'm actually just finished, and I've been looking for accommodation for actually quite a while, because I knew it would take me a while. So I started looking at the beginning of my final year, and I think it is really hard. I think you do have to look, you do your research really, really, really thoroughly. So you need to, I went to one estate agent, and then I went to a different estate agent, and then I went to a different estate agent. So you need to get all your information from as many different places as possible. And I did a lot of visiting, and that's how I found out that a lot of the accommodation I wanted was really unsuitable. But I think doing the legwork or getting someone else to do the legwork is key, because there's very little accurate information that you can get online, I find.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I would add to that you basically don't restrict yourself to one type or tenure of housing. So I always, if I'm doing it with someone or advising someone, is I look at what could do this for you? What is it you want? You know, do you want to live with other people and share? Do you want your own place? What does it need to be? Does it need to be adapted or just accessible, or what does it need to be? But have the fundamentals. But be really open-minded about whether you might get that through, you know, a council or housing association, shared ownership or private renting. You know, so open up a whole range of options, because I think getting housing is always about opportunity and just the right place coming up at the right time. And sometimes, you know, it's if you close down your options and say I'm only going to go for council housing, or I'm only going to go for private rented, you're potentially missing out on other opportunities. And the other thing I think is getting really clear about your rights as well, because I think if you are clearly not going to go back home and you clearly want to live independently, you know, that you should be getting a priority for housing. And I just think most housing departments or choice-based letting schemes don't understand how to prioritise people, and you know, so for example, you know, young people with learning disabilities living with their families, I think, you know, well into adulthood is just unacceptable. You know, independence is right, and so really pushing that so that people get a higher priority for housing, or you know, that the family is under a lot of stress because of your support needs, and you know, but really, you know, finding those things make a difference and getting a priority.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as I touched upon, when I'd done the big move away from the family home sort of after uni down to London, in the end I actually got a housing association flat, and I ended up going down the part rent, part buy joint ownership scheme, which I hadn't even heard of. But to be quite honest, the reason was it was the only 2-bed accessible flat what seemed like in the whole of the area of London I needed. And I had to take it because I had to start a job, you know, very imminently. So, as you say, you know, don't limit yourself to one type of housing, because you know, there are other options out there as well. Cool. We haven't got any other questions coming in, so I mean, if anyone, as I said, has a question or even just some other additional thoughts to throw into the mix, then now's the chance to do that. One thing I was wanting to ask you actually, Mathy, was what are the plans after, obviously you've presented on the webinar today, but with the findings generally, and I know you work with the Trailblazers, are there a sort of structured plan how to promote your findings?
Yeah, so the whole my dissertation, essentially taking out the really boring bits, is going into the new report, which is called Locked Out, and that will be published, I think, the very beginning of July. I'm probably going to say this wrong. I think it's July 3rd, July 4th. And then once it's published, they're going to present it to the APPG, the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Young Disabled People, in Parliament in London, on the 11th, I think. But I'm not here, which is sad. So I can't present my own findings in Parliament. But so that's the plans, I think.
Like, wow, so you're going right to the top then. You're not messing about here.
Yeah. No. That was the whole. When I presented my proposal to the department, I was like, I'm going to present this in Parliament, and I think that was the whole reason they let me do it.
Wow, that's fantastic.
So.
And so, what kind of specific, are there one or two tangible changes that you hope the government will make as a result of that?
I really hope that, like, the changes that I mentioned in my presentation are really simple changes that I think the government is just, it's really, I don't know how to say it. I think it's just really simple changes that can be implemented, but maybe no one's ever, I don't think no one's ever thought of them. I think it's just no one really has the time, or no one's really thought about them. Sure,
so you're hoping really just to start a bit more of a debate at the higher level to then...
Yeah, I'm just kind of hoping to maybe kick something into motion.
Yeah, a bit
maybe people haven't thought about it, but now that we're mentioning it, maybe something will happen.
Brilliant. Bobby from the Trailblazers has just said that anyone can come, and I think there's going to be information on the website, so
yeah,
you can go to the Trailblazers website, and any questions that you have are welcome. What I'll do is when I record the session, so I'll email everyone that's attended and spoken here with some other contacts and helpful websites. So then that would be easier for everyone to work with.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Well, there's no other actual questions coming in, so I think that was everything I wanted to cover. Bobby's just saying the APPG is on July the 4th, so obviously I'll try and get that email out as quick as possible, but if you are interested, then just head to the Trailblazers website, and then there'll be more information there anyway. Cool. And anything from you two, any sort of overarching comments or things that you'd like people to contact you about?
I think just to say that we do have a housing advice service. I think our details are on the presentation to contact us and talk to us if you want to find out more about housing and the ways of getting it. And thank you for inviting me to speak.
Brilliant. Well, so I'll share the slides and all of the links on the email, so I'll make sure everyone gets that. And yeah, thank you both for taking the time to present today as well. It's much appreciated.
Thank you for having me.
Cool. Good luck with everything, guys, and yeah, we'll catch up again soon.
Great.
Okay. See you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Oh yeah. One more thing. I'm going to mute both of you now and just finish off on a couple of other things. Actually, which is to do with you may have seen on Twitter. There's the conference I've been promoting. So for any people that are in the audience that want to get involved on that, then by all means that's fine to get in touch with me if you want to speak on the conference, or indeed just to know what the link is when I launch it. So that's the next sort of project that's going on, and I'm looking at doing some more webinars around other different topics. The next one may well be on the subject of special educational needs, so sort of stay tuned really for future webinars and for the conference 2012. So just a little bit of up and coming projects that I'm going to be running online. But yeah, thank you to everyone in the audience that watched it today. Thank you to the speakers, and I'll see you all again soon. Bye bye.